Hey everyone, this is Greg with Spotted Tongue Woodworking. I will be making a faux beam out of these white oak pieces that I had gotten on sale from a local landscape company. This stuff is air dried, sawn right through the trunk, so it's not really fine furniture quality, but I think it'll be perfect for what I'm going to use it for. I had gone ahead and marked out what parts of these boards that I wanted to keep. I had to cut a lot of the ends off because these were air dried and not prepared properly. The ends were not sealed. So what happens when wood dries is the ends will dry out quicker than the middle. And when the ends dry out too quickly, they will split. So especially white oak. So I had to cut out parts of the ends. And I'll be using the track saw to rip a straight edge down these boards. I need to keep them in close to 8-foot lengths to span the gap in the height. So use the track saw instead of running it on the jointer or the table saw. I'll be able just to make a quick, clean, straight edge. This Wen track saw with the Power Tech tracks. It's not the most high-end, high-tech option out there, but it's a fantastic budget option to get, I would say, close to 90% of the quality of a higher end tool such as Festool and Makita. So now that I have a straight edge I can work off of, I'm going to rip these down, close down to my finished size. A lot of these, because of the way they were sawn, they have parts of it that were really nice, parts of it that were not nice, so I'm just going to cut off the parts that I don't like, keep everything that I really like. Again, because these were sawn by a landscape company, not by a sawmill, they're just sawn straight through the tree. There's nothing spectacular. It's not graded lumber. You can't get this, really can't get this type of lumber from an actual mill. So what that means is there was a lot of figure, there was a lot of weird designs, especially with the white oak, with the raise and the flex that you get from quarter sawn and rift sawn material, which I think adds a nice little element of something that you can't typically buy. So now that I have my straight edges, I'm going to joint one face of these boards. Some of these boards are going to be a little bit wider than my jointer, so I will show you how I got through that coming up soon. But some of these boards, the way they were dried, they had a little bit of a kink on one end. So I had to try to get this kink out, try to smooth it out so that by the time I put it through my planer, if you put a warped board through a planer, you're going to get a thinner warped board out of the planer. So you need to joint it first. Because some of these boards were wider than my jointer, I just keep running the same face through, and I'm left with a little bit of a lip. I just take that lip down with a hand plane, with my Stanley Bailey number 6 in this case. So now that I have one flat face to work off of, I'm going to start planing these down on the DeWalt planer, getting them nice and clean. As you can see, a lot of those flecks. And I actually ended up splitting the milling process over a couple days. Because these boards were air dried, probably not quite at the moisture content they needed to be. You can see it's not perfectly straight. It wasn't straight when I left the day before. I just wanted to make sure the wood wouldn't keep moving after I let it sit after taking some material off. So now that, the next day, go back to the jointer, try to keep working that one kink on the end, try to work that out. Keep going that same face down the jointer over and over and over, trying to get a flat reference face that I can run through my planer then. It just takes time. This is probably the longest I ever took to mill this amount of lumber. I've milled a lot more, which has taken a lot longer, but just taking a slow process, let the wood continue to acclimate to my shop and the conditions. So jointed, run it through the planer, and you're going to see very beautiful white oak graining, white oak figure. Because these boards were so wild in the way they were cut and the graining direction, that because I don't have a spiral cutter head on my planer, I had to pay really close attention to the ways I was sending the board through the planer, and even then paying attention to the grain direction, running downhill rather than uphill. Because it switched so much, I still had a little bit of tear out with these pieces. You can see very wonderful ray flecking from the medullary rays. It's very particular, this style, to white oak. You're not going to find it in many other species of wood. I love this piece. It's going to end up being a corner, the focal point of one side of the beam across the ceiling. I just love the figure and the graining of this wood. Now that the wood is milled to my final dimensions, or thickness and width, I'm going to cut it down to close to my final length. This will help me as I have to cut long miters along the edges. I don't want to be cutting too much because the shorter boards are easier to handle. So take it, cut them close to my final everything. Make sure it's nice, straight, flat, even. As precise as I can possibly be with these boards. Here I'm just cleaning up the final edge, making sure I have a nice straight edge to work off of on my from my table saw. And this is actually a little trick, is that you can take these boards and you can joint on a table saw. You don't need to use a jointer or a track saw. You can use a table saw, and what you do is you just take a little bit off of each end, off of each side. You flip it end to end, run it through, and eventually you just take a little bit off with each pass. It'll work its way clear. It works better if you have a larger fence. So, I try not to use that method too often. Set my blade to 45 because now I'm going to cut long miters on the edges of these boards to make a nice long box, much like how I made the mantle beams. Those were a lot smaller, so this is the same thing on a larger scale, and having those long miters, making sure the board stays flat to the face of the table saw to have a consistent cut all the way along each end. So again, it just takes time. Go a little slow, precise. So make sure my widths are good, my lengths are good. It's a little tight, little snug, which is exactly what I want. I'd rather it be a little long rather than a little short. So we'll go and we will cut everything to my final lengths before I put these pieces together. Now that everything has been milled and cut to my final dimensions that I will be ultimately using for these beams, I'm going to mark out for biscuits. I'll be using biscuits to help keep the miter joints in alignment, help with the glue up, help with the clamping, and it'll just help be with a cleaner project. I used brad nails with the mantle beams that I made because they were supposed to be a little more rustic. These, I'm looking for something a little more refined with this not so refined lumber. So I don't want any nail holes in this. So I'll be using biscuits to align these miter joints. So, just get all the way across, and we'll go ahead, set the joiner to 135 degrees to work on a 45-degree angle, something like that. Probably dominoes might hold things a little bit tighter because with the biscuits, again, they just help with the alignment. They don't really add much strength. They don't really add much holding power. They are just there to make sure things are in the same plane. So, biscuits are great. I don't feel like biscuits get enough love, but they definitely do have their limitations. You can see everything fits together fairly nice. I will go with it. I will glue it up and make sure there's nice glue across the whole face of the board, inside on the biscuits, inside the joints, and we will glue it up, and I'm going to clamp it all together. It wasn't until after the project where I saw someone else doing something very similar, I realized I could have clamped up, if I turned the board on its side, I could have clamped it all together, both sides together at one time. I ended up doing it one side at a time, so one side at a time, two sides on each beam, 3 beams, so I had 6 separate glue ups that I had to do. So that in itself took time because you do the glue up, you have to let the glue dry, you have to let the glue set. If it was warmer, it would have gone a little bit quicker, but it was a little bit cooler in the shop, so the glue just takes a little bit of time to set and to hold, especially with these beams, because some of these miters, even after milling the boards, planing and jointing them, the boards were still moving just a little bit and wanted to pull away from each other at some parts in the joints. Time will tell how these boards acclimate to the house. I know that the moisture content in the house does change a lot. It's an older house. It breathes, as builders might say, and I've seen it in one of the tables that I have. I can see the wood moving in the breadboard joints. So time will tell how these beams hold up. We'll just continue to add character to these beams. All right, so go ahead, pop these out of the clamps. I have a box. I have a white oak box. The miter, I was fairly happy with a lot of the miters. Get the glue out, get any squeeze out, clean that up with my little block plane. Block planes are great. Use them, abuse them, and it's whatever. So clean the glue off, and what I'm going to end up doing actually is, the miters were good. I was really happy with a lot of them. There were some spots that I wasn't so crazy about, so just quick go over them with the edge of a screwdriver, and you can fold the miters over, clean them up, and make them look just a lot nicer, a lot more presentable. It'll fill in that little bit of a gap with some wood material before I sand it and finish it. All right, so now that the corners are cleaned up, I'm gonna start sanding. Worked on my grits, 80, 100, 120, just up to 150. I don't like going too high on my work pieces, especially if I'm going to be putting like an oil finish on them. Because if you go too high of a grit, with standing oil, if you go 220, 320, 400, it'll be really smooth. But what you've done is you've effectively closed off all the pores. So it's not going to absorb any of the stain. It's not going to absorb any of the finish. If you're doing a film finish, sure, it'll just sit on the wood and it doesn't matter. Here I'm going to drill holes to, countersunk holes to put the beam up. These holes are actually going to be hidden because you see how I'm going to assemble this beam in this place. Top beam goes up, and those holes right there, those screws are actually going to be covered by these quote-unquote support beams, which be pushed up nice and tight. Again, these beams, these elements are just decorative. The 2x4s and the 2x6s behind them are going to be what is helping the ceiling just a little bit. I had previously closed this part off with the 2x4s and the 2x6s to close the throughway a little bit. There was a little bit of cracking in the drywall. I wanted to make that disappear. So white oak wrap around all these beams. Excuse the house. We have kids. I'm sure a lot of you will understand. A lot of kids, and then a lot of unfinished projects. Like I say, the joke is I start things, I don't finish things. There's some truth to that. Part of it is there's just a lot going on. And so here, I tried out a new finish, the Minwax Antique Oil Finish. I believe it's just a Danish oil with a little bit more varnish in it, because it does, look exactly the same as the Danish oil, nice warm glow of an oil finish. But a second coat also gives it a little bit more gloss than a typical Danish oil finish does. So I was kind of happy with that. I really love the warm glow of an oil finish. But it seems that warm glow oil finishes, they're very traditional, but what it seems is what we're seeing in more and more of water white finishes. Finishes that don't necessarily affect the natural color of the wood. So we will be using the oil finish on these white oak beams. I like the color. I have to paint the walls still. So we will, after I paint the walls, we'll see if we still like the warm glow. If not, I'll sand it off and we'll finish it with a water clear finish. You see now I added a few more holes, a few more screws to keep the beams square to the boards. And what that really means is that I'm going to have to find something to to hide those holes. My first thought was to drill and create little walnut plugs. I almost give like a green and green or a craftsman style, or to find some sort of metal wrap that I can do to make it look like these beams are bound together, held together by metal banding. I'm open to suggestions, ideas, whatever you think might look good. But here we go, just fasten them in, make sure they're nice and tight, nice and square to the wall, to the boards, to the beams, to each other. Pull them in nice and tight, and that's where we're at. So these are just going up temporarily. I'm leaving the holes open. I'm leaving everything open because I'm going to be taking this down because we need to paint these walls. These walls were not painted when we moved in, before we moved in, after we moved in. It's just one project that I haven't gotten to yet. Kind of just one at a time. But there it is. Those are white oak beams. I think it's going to look really great once the rest of the rooms are finished. But even for now, it really just cleans everything up, helps it look less like a construction site. And if you've gone all the way through, thank you for watching. Thank you so much to everyone who has given me work this year, everyone who has put up with the hectic schedule that we live, and just for watching. The people are paying attention, seeing what I'm doing. It means a lot. If you made it this far, here's a quick little peek at my absolute favorite point of this project right there. I love that figure. Comment below what you liked about the project, what you might have done differently about the project. Subscribe to our channel for a lot more things coming up. Thank you so much. Happy holidays.